Well, Shabbat Shalom and welcome. This is VBS Torah Study for Shabbos, and I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein here in Encino, California, joined this afternoon by my dear friend and my teacher, Rabbi Mark Gelman of South Florida. And both of us, like so many others in the Jewish world, our hearts are so broken and so heavy. We're watching the events. First of all, we're watching the events in Israel, the invasion of Gaza now. We're hoping for the quick and efficient eradication of the evil of Hamas. We're feeling the pain that the world feels over civilians in the Gaza Strip, but at the same time, we understand the necessity of this operation with a deep personal necessity to root out this evil that wants so deeply, desperately to destroy us. And at the same time, we're watching the events around our country, the eruption of vicious anti-Semitism in cities around the world, and vicious anti-Semitism of all places on American college campuses. And the question that we've been talking about, I'm sure that so many Jewish families are talking about, do you send your kid to college? Where do you send your kid to college? And what do you say to your child on their way to college, or your child who is on a college campus, about this anti-Semitism that has risen all over? We talked about that a little bit last week. This week, of course, we study Parshat Vayera, which is one of the great Torah portions for these great moral questions. It begins with three angels visiting Abraham to announce that he and Sarah will have a child. It commences with the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, Abraham bargaining for the lives, ironically, of people outside of his tribe, which has always been the watchword of Jewish compassion. We never saw ourselves committed solely to our own. We have always taken deep responsibility to be a blessing to the peoples of the world, as God charged us to be. And so Abraham fights for the lives even of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. And then, of course, it culminates with the incredibly deep and difficult story of the sacrifice of Isaac. And we read this story, and you can't help but reflect on what this says about this moment as we watch Israel struggle for its existence, as we listen to the horrifying tones of anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism about us and the world. So I want to move to a slightly different topic, actually, although it's deeply, deeply rooted in the Torah portion. I want to talk to your grandchildren, Mark. I want to talk to mine. And they're going to ask us a question one day. And it's a question I think that they deserve an answer to, an explicit answer and a strong answer. And they're going to ask us, why do you care about Israel so much? Why Israel? I mean, when I open the morning paper, there are tragedies going on all over the world today, of course. There's tragedies in every corner of the world, but the tragedy that my heart breaks for is a tragedy in Israel, the Middle East. Why Israel? You and I grew up at a time when we were surrounded by the vestiges of the greatest moment of evil in all of human history visited upon our people. And so for most of my life, why Israel was answered simply by pointing backward to the Shoah and saying, that's the reality of the world. Israel is our answer. But our children don't know that. For our children, the Shoah, the Holocaust, is as much ancient history as, well, the destruction of the temple was for us. So when you talk to your grandkids, when you talk to young people in your community, and they ask you, Rabbi Gelman, why Israel? How do you answer that question?
Okay. It comes down for me through all the fancy ideology of homelessness and our biblical rooting in the land and our burying for millennia, burying Jews in the diaspora with a little bag of earth from Jerusalem, and that connection back to 300 years of Jewish sovereignty under a united monarchy of King Saul, David, and Solomon, back through and beyond all of those historical reasons why we have rooting in the land and a love for the land And the fact that we have achieved a linguistic miracle, the first dead language to ever be brought back to life. No one was speaking Hebrew, and all of a sudden people were speaking Hebrew on the street to order a falafel. Beyond all that, it comes down to me personally to a story about a dog and a story about a box of crayons. So, in one of my many trips to Israel, I'm going to a Misrad Klita, the relocation and absorption center for what is now inappropriate to call Falasha Jews. We used to call them, now it's Beta Yisrael, Ethiopian Jews who were saved from the civil war in Ethiopia through Project Magic Carpet and literally brought in planes they'd never seen an airplane, brought in planes to Israel and resettled and given a new life, a life. So I'm in a Gan Yeladim, a kindergarten class, and there's a little black boy with a yarmulke, which at that time, it still knocked me back a little bit on my heels, because I guess it's the sort of proto-racism. I guess that's how the woke generation would label my surprise at seeing a black Jew. But nonetheless, I was not just amused, but intrigued, deeply spiritually intrigued. And then I talked to him in Hebrew. I asked him his name, and he says, "My name is Moshe. Hello, Moshe. And I see you're making a picture of a dog." "Yes, it's a dog. It's a kelev." "Oh, it's so nice. You're a good drawer, Moshe. It's a good dog." But can I ask you, Moshe, the dog is smiling. Why? The dog had a big grin on his face. Why is the dog smiling? And Moshe looked up at me, beautiful eyes. And he said, "The dog is smiling because I don't have to eat him." Oh my God.
Yeah.
That was his life in Ethiopia. Mm-hmm. You saw anything living, you killed it and you ate it because you were dying of starvation. Mm. And here he was in a place where he could draw a picture of a dog that didn't have to be killed for lunch. And I said, whenever anyone asks me, why Israel, I'm going to tell them because that's where Moshe went, where he didn't have to kill a dog for lunch. Mm. And another time, I'm very sensitive to visiting kindergarten classes. I don't think I'm the best at relating to little newborn babies. I like them, but they look like monkeys, and they basically are squirmy. Oh. And I'm not really emotionally connected to.
I'm going to get such hate mail from this.
I know it is, but me, right to me, not to him.
Yeah, please.
But when they get older, and not that much older, when they get cute,
yeah,
when they get cute, I am totally bowled over. I'm in love with little kids. And so one of the trips, one of the members of my synagogue made crayons. And we bought a whole bunch of crayons to take to a kibbutz Gan Yeladim. So we go into the kindergarten class, and we have a big bag of crayons, and we dump all these boxes of crayons on the table for 10, 15 kids. And they all, rush for a box. And then something happened that I have never seen in my life.
Mm-hmm.
Every child who had a box of crayons, instead of putting their name on the box, said, they opened the box and they poured the crayons into the middle of the table. All of them shared their crayons immediately without being instructed to do so, as a natural act of sharing. And I realized that because of kibbutz life and because they were brought up in a communal world
Right.
of sensitivity in which what is mine is yours,
Right.
and we share what we have, we, that is, the Israeli people, had created in kibbutz life not just a new way to live, but new people.
Right.
New people, crayon sharers. So if you ask me why Israel, it's because it's a place where you don't have to have dog eaters and you build up a lot of crayon sharers. And that is why Israel is unique for me.
That's beautiful. It kibbutz created a new kind of human being. Exactly right.
No question.
A very different sense of self.
Yes.
And I remember visiting kibbutz and having that revelation, because it was such an interesting sense of self.
You agree?
Oh my God, it was very powerful for me. I mean, I was sensitive to it because my parents are kibbutzniks. So I grew up in a home.
Right.
I grew up in a home where that was true, but it wasn't anything as intense as it was on the kibbutz.
No.
That was the amazing part. So I would answer the
How
question.
about for you?
Yeah. So I want to say in two levels. The first level, it has to do with a simple word that you and I gravitate to right away, but has to be explicated. And that's the word we. And it's because in America, we are taught to be individuals, to stand for ourselves, to, blaze our own path through life, to pull our own strings. But in Jewish life, there is a sense of peoplehood. It may not be as intense as on kibbutz, but there's a sense of sharing, of peoplehood, that our destiny as individuals is not nearly as important as our destiny as a collective. And that both of us have a very deep sense of Jewish peoplehood. And you can't understand Israel unless you have a sense of Jewish peoplehood. And if you don't have that sense, you don't have a sense that the fate of the Jewish people belongs to me, and my fate belongs to the fate of the Jewish people, the destiny of the Jewish people, then Israel doesn't make a lot of sense. It is just another country where a lot of people look like me live, or don't look like me, but a lot of people of my ethnicity might live. But if you have a sense of Jewish peoplehood, then Israel belongs to me in a very, very personal way. That's the first element. The second element, I think, has to do with history. And here I'll tell you, it's a little bit long, but I'll try to go through this quickly. There's a story in the Talmud, I think we've taught it many times, about the revolt in the year 70. Remember, the Jews revolted against Roman power in the year 70. The Romans came and sieged the city. The revolution was going very badly. And so the rabbis decided to give up. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai gets smuggled out of the town, out of the city, and he goes to see the general Vespasian. Turns out Vespasian has just been elected emperor. And the custom in the Roman Empire was that on the day of the emperor's election, you could ask for any favor and he would grant it. It's like the first scene in the movie The Godfather, right? So Vespasian says to Yochanan, what do you want? And you would think that what he would have said is spare the city, but he doesn't. He says instead, give me Yavne and its scholars. And even the Talmud responds and said, what, did he lose his mind? He could have asked for Jerusalem. And there's a whole discussion about why he didn't. But I would suggest that the answer was very clear to Yochanan, that if Jewish identity at that moment of history was attached to anything material, a place, a building, a city, it was going to be vulnerable. And what he wanted to do was to make us a spiritual community, not a political community. And that strategy, believe it or not, well, believe it, that strategy worked for 1,800 years. For 1,800 years, we floated over history. Israel, for us, became not a place, but a dream. So when we said at the end of every Seder, the end of Yom Kippur, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, we didn't really mean going back to a place called Jerusalem. We meant, may the dream of a world redeemed come to be this next year. But in fact, Jerusalem was a dream for us because we didn't participate in history. We were sort of like that feather at the beginning of Forrest Gump. We sort of floated over the waves of history. True, the pogroms came and destroyed, and sometimes we were thrown out of the lands where we lived, but we stayed out of the rough and tumble conflicts of politics, and we survived 1,800 years. And then in the middle of the 19th century, that changed. And the person who saw it clearest was Theodor Herzl. And he understood that we can no longer remain out of history because we could no longer protect ourselves. That strategy wasn't going to work anymore. I think Herzl saw the Holocaust in his nightmares. And I think that he saw it coming. He wrote about things like it. I think he saw it coming, and he understood that at this moment of our history, we needed a place, and we needed the power and the position and the visibility that comes with statehood. And so he brought us back. That's how Zionism was founded. He brought us back to the land of Israel. And 51 years after the Zionist Congress, Israel is founded. And sure enough, it's the place where all the refugees of Europe, not all, but many of the refugees of Europe ended up. It's a place where refugees from Ethiopia, as you mentioned, from Yemen, from Arab countries end up. It's a place where that militates for the liberation of Jews of the Soviet Union, and many of them end up there too. So I think that what Israel represents for me, first of all, is it's where we need to be in our history right now. It represents our life in the world, and that the removal of Israel from our history would be the removal of our presence in the world right now. It's the most visible and powerful symbol that we are alive as a people, that we are alive as a people. And it turns out that not only was Herzl's dream fulfilled, but the dreams of so many others, because, for example, Achad Ha'am, the great cultural Zionist, said, this will be a place where a new Jewish culture will arise. And sure enough, the fact that we speak a Sephardic Hebrew, and the fact that there is new scholarship and new cultural creativity coming from Israel, that it has sparked a sense of pride in Jews around the world. These are all the dreams of the great Zionists. So for me, Israel is the symbol and the expression that we're a living people. And especially after the Holocaust, especially with that moment after the Holocaust, when there was every reason in the world for the Jewish people to lie down and die, because everything we believed in was destroyed. We believed in science and education and culture. We believed in the goodness of humanity. We believed in even the religious belief of a Messiah, and none of it happened. And so instead, you have an Israel which comes along and says, here's something new to believe in, a new expression of a new Jewish dream. That, I think, is a very powerful statement.
I agree.
Now, I don't know if that works with kids, because I don't know if they have a sense of Jewish peoplehood, and I don't know if they have an understanding of Jewish history, and I don't know if they have a realistic sense of the world as it is. If anything that this crisis has given us back is a realistic sense of how much evil there is left in the world, and how much we tend to be the target of it. We, the Jewish people, tend to be its target.
Yeah, I think let's focus on that point, because I think that's the point of purchase for young people. For all the years of Israel's existence, we've lived with a kind of a functional myth that, well, although Jews are endangered and imperiled in Israel, they aren't endangered and imperiled in America. Now, the ADL, for a while, with some exceptions of some leaders of the ADL, have basically taken the point of view, no, there's still a danger here, but no one bought that argument, really. This was a land of assimilation, unlimited opportunities, massive and exorbitant and flashy Jewish super wealth, the total destruction of old anti-Semitic membership requirements at elite colleges, at country clubs, and at law firms, and all of that, all of that changed. Well, all of a sudden, as a result of this and the horrific news from college campuses of Jewish kids being chased into a library and barricaded there, a kid getting beat up for trying to stop the burning of an Israeli flag, professors giving extra credit for kids who go to a Hamas rally. All of a sudden, Jewish kids understand that people hate us and that anti-Semitism is real in America. Mm-hmm. And I will say, as Al-Chet Shechatani, that I myself might have been part of that naysayers group that said, look, what do you think this is? Tsarist Russia? You know, I wasn't convinced that the ADL wasn't turning up anti-Semites under every bush so that they could raise money. I must say, I may not have been helpful in many years of my view of this issue, but now I'm completely gobsmacked. I'm completely, utterly astounded by the level of anti-Jewish hatred that has surfaced immediately after the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust. Where did this come from? Is it just Arab students on campus? No. Is it the complete collapse of the Jewish-Black alliance? No. It seems that there's something deep here. And it isn't the traditional medieval reason for hating Jews and killing us, which is you killed our Lord. There's no Christian anti-Semitism trope that's going on campuses. This is pure left-wing, Jews are colonial oppressors. So these kids, and this is the point, these kids have to figure out what are they going to do in a world in which Jew hatred is palpable and ineradicable and is affecting them personally.
Yeah, that's very true.
How do they live a new life? What changes in their life now? What do you think, Ed?
Well, I'm not willing to give up on the promise of American liberal democracy. I mean, I if I did, I'd, pick up my family and make Aliyah. That's all Israel needs is another rabbi, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So I still think that American liberal democracy is worth fighting for, both as an American, as a Jew, as a human being, because I think it says something very important about who we are as Jews and where we are in the world. I mean, I believe in that. I think that the notion, the shlilat hagolah, the notion that diaspora is untenable is not a true value. I think that there is possibilities of Jewish life in diaspora.
Yeah, I agree with that.
But I think that it's important to recognize what Israel's done for us. So for those who say we need an Israel because in case America becomes untenable, all right, there are some who are going to believe that.
I'm not in that camp.
But for me, Israel gave us something different, something more powerful. Israel gave us pride. You remember the 6-Day War? I mean, it changed the way we thought about ourselves.
Yes.
It gave us a sense of visibility, a sense of pride, a sense of place. It has given us a culture, a new kind of Jewish culture. which we couldn't have anticipated. And it's very important for a people to have visible symbols of its life in the world. And for us, Israel becomes this very, very powerful visible symbol of our connection to our past, of our connection as a people, as our destiny as a people. So yes, living with anti-Semitism, living with hatred is now become the new normal, the new reality for American Jews. And
That's a big thing. That's a new thing.
It is a very big thing. You're absolutely
right.
And
it's a totally new thing for these kids. It's a new thing for me.
And it's navigate. Right.
Right. And the problem. And here's the question that I want to ask these kids who are on the left and maybe sympathetic to some of Israel's policies, settlements, or whatever, and who have been critical of Israel and whatever. Let's suppose you're in that group. I want to say something to you. I want to ask you this question. Imagine that there was no Israel. Do you really think that the danger to Jews in America would disappear? These people who hate us, these people who are marching, let's suppose there was no Israel. Do you think that would change the fact that they want us dead, to be blunt about it? I mean, it's clear it wouldn't change them. To me, this isn't going to change them. And I also want to say something to the LGBTQ community, who we don't address on our show enough. I want to say, listen, imagine that you were in a Hamas-controlled Israel or a Hamas-controlled Gaza, and you came out as what you are, and you have a right to be. Imagine how you'd be treated there. And these are the people that you're supporting? People who would throw you off a rooftop? You can't be serious here. Mm-hmm. You can't be serious. There is a time when you have to say, my God. When the Nazis came, they didn't ask whether you were a communist, a socialist, a conservative. They took you and they killed you because they hated you and they wanted you dead. And even though it's still, I think, ultimately impossible to explain the origins of anti-Semitism fully when you look at its extent, the truth of the matter is it's not going to go away, even if Israel goes away, even if it changes its policies completely. It's not going away. Right. This is a culture that, for whatever reason, wants us dead. And I don't mean the Muslim culture, because our greatest times, Maimonides wrote in the Muslim world. And
wait, but I want to sprinkle some of your comments with a little bit of nuance, though. Okay.
Okay, please.
First of all, because I was one of those people that was criticizing the government of Israel, and I don't think criticizing the government of Israel is an issue here. No. I want to make very, very clear that Hamas is not the same as a movement for the liberation of Palestine, or for justice for Palestinians, or for an Israel that takes more cognizance of its Arab citizens or its Bedouin citizens. Israel should always become better. It should always be more compassionate and more, but it has to be done within the bounds of security, because it's a very dangerous neighborhood. Hamas doesn't want a Palestinian state. Hamas wants to destroy Israel, wants to destroy the Jewish people worldwide. It's part of an Iranian jihad movement, an Iranian movement which sees a sort of messianic Islam coming into the world when all the Jews and all the infidels are destroyed. I think it's very important.
That's my point.
I know. It's very, very important, though, to say that being part of a vigorous debate over Israeli democracy, Israeli policies on the West Bank, toward Israeli policies toward Palestinians, is part of Israel. That's part of Israeli democracy.
Yes, of course it is. My point is that it isn't about that.
I know.
This attack wasn't about Israeli policies on the West Bank.
Right.
It's that simple.
But
It was
now let's
about
go
the fact that Jews live there. Jews live in Israel. And when they talk about one state from the sea to the river, they're not talking about the West Bank. They're talking about Tel Aviv.
Right. Yeah, they're
They're
talking
about
right. When they
Jerusalem.
say
So,
Palestine must be free, they mean free of Jews, but they also mean
yes,
free of LGBTQ plus people.
yes,
They also mean free of feminists, because Iran is not a comfortable place for outspoken women today. And
correct.
that's what Hamas would have, right? And free of Christians, by the way, because it's also not a friendly place for Christian society.
Right. They've been pushed out of Bethlehem.
That's what happens. Now, there's one more piece of this, Mark, and I really don't want to sound like some sort of right-wing radio pundit, but I think we have to point this out as well, especially to young people, that in that environment, in the environment in my experience of that, of the college environment, you get to a place where no moral judgments are permitted.
Yes.
Where everything is of equal value, where all cultures are of equal value, where all expressions of culture are of equal value, where everything is tolerated, accepted, and welcome, except perhaps Jewish life. But the problem is that here in the real world where you and I live, there's good and evil. And evil exists. And killing babies is evil. It's evil under all circumstances. It's evil. It's killing, what Hamas did on the 7th of October is just evil. And the inability to say, this is wrong, this is evil, is a real detriment to the way human civilization has been developing. And it's something that we have to sort of understand, like, why would you want that level of moral relative? I understand why you want tolerance of extra culture. I get that. But why moral, a level of moral relativism which admits no moral judgments? None of us can live with that. None of us do live with that. We make moral judgments all the time. But that's what seems to me to be at the sort of heart of that university culture, where everything then becomes flattened out, and everything becomes expressed in terms of oppressors and the oppressed, and everything is expressed in terms of privilege and unprivilege. And in that sort of flattened moral environment, this kind of hatred of Jews bubbles up to the surface, even and becomes celebrated. And that's what hurts so very deeply.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound like a right-wing pundit. I really don't.
Well, you don't.
I'm not.
Believe me.
But I'm trying to just be reasonable in this kind of environment.
Right. And I completely agree about dissent against Israeli policies. That's not anti-Semitic. It's not anything. It's entirely part of a healthy, thriving democracy. That's not the point. The point is, if you're honest about what's happening now, an Israel with totally different policies would still have people who want us dead. And that is a reality that it took me a long time to have to face.
Yeah.
Because and if there is a flaw in the progressive view, and of course I think there is, from my point of view, that flaw is that somehow anti-Semitism is related to the behavior of Jews. My point is a simple one, and I can't say it more simply than this. No. Anti-Semitism is the result of the existence of Jews.
Right.
Not the behavior of Jews.
Right.
Now, this isn't to say, again, that behaviors shouldn't get better, and it isn't to say that in the war in Gaza that Israeli soldiers should give up tohar neshek and give up purity of arms, and they should still be careful as humanly possible not to kill civilians. Not to say any of that, which we all agree with. It's to say to people who have never thought this way, who have never imagined this to be true, that what you do as a Jew doesn't matter to the true anti-Semite. It's the fact that you live. It's the fact that you exist. And it is that reality and whatever response we need to give to it that is going to create the future of our community. And it will be the challenge of the rest of my life and the rest of your life, Ed.
So we'll finish this our Torah. We promise we'll get back to Torah one of these days.
One of these
As
days.
soon as the world lets us. But this Shabbos, we join with good folks all over the world and Jewish people all over the world to pray for peace, to pray for the return of these hostages, to pray for comfort for those who have lost loved ones. I'll even pray for the well-being of civilians, families in Gaza.
Yes.
Who are under the violence and were actually held captive by Hamas, if anybody.
Yes.
And we pray that those who are fighting against this evil are victorious, efficient, and careful. And pray for better times for our people and for people in Israel. And let's hope this Shabbos brings shalom. Let's hope this Shabbos brings some promise of peace. Mark, thank you for learning with me. Thank you to everyone for listening. Take good care of this Shabbos. Stay safe out there. Be careful, be careful, be careful. Join us next week. We'll continue to learn Torah. Stay well.
Good Shabbos, Ed.